if you want to support my side channel where I talk about non-esports stuff and save 10% off some delicious gamer subs or anything on their website, you could use my code Thorin, Thorin at gamersubs.gg. I'd recommend lemonade flavour. It's a classic, but it's actually not boring. It's just a really delicious, nice lemonade flavour, like a traditional lemonade. It's obviously not carbonated, is it? No sugar since it's Gamer Sops. Check out everything on their site. Now, I thought what I would do is one of my episodes where I basically recommend a bunch of stuff. I'm like the taste setter in this sense, and a taste maker, I think you call it. And what I realised was there have been over the years so many TV anthologies, you know, series where normally the premise goes, like a lot of them are horror, you'll notice. What you do is you get a whole bunch of directors who are like indie directors, famous directors, up-and-coming directors, legendary directors, and what you do is you give each person one episode, and the idea is there's no connecting factor to the other series, except maybe some loose thing of like, it's the Twilight Zone, or welcome to the Outer Limits. This is Guillermo del Toro, and this is my cabinet of... Aside from that, like, there's a loose way to sort of collect it together, like, fully enough, like a pulp anthology would be, like editor's picks or amazing tales of sci-fi and fantasy. It's very loose and tangential, like what they're even linking them together to. So really, they are just separate stories. But that means the downside of those shows is unless they have an iconic, like, sort of famous theme to them, like the Twilight Zone, which by the way, a lot of people still have never gone back and watched the black and white Twilight Zone. A lot of people are never going to get into it because the problem is it's not a continual story. It's not a serial. You don't watch episode 1 and then that build characters that in episode 2 do something, that in episode 4 or 5 gets really good, bro, and you've got to watch the season cliffhanger. There's none of that. So it means that actually a lot of these anthologies, people just don't know about them, dismiss them, or they might just watch a random episode or episode 1 and they're going to go, maybe this isn't for me. So what I thought I'd do is I'm going to do an episode where I've actually gone through a whole bunch of these anthologies and I've picked out one episode to watch from the anthology that can just stand alone. It needs no other information or introduction, and it's just a really good piece of TV. So as it says in the episode title, these are going to be single episode TV gems. So these are all, in my opinion, required viewing just on their own. And also, I thought this way, you don't have to watch the whole season. Just watch this one. If you're interested, there might be a couple more in that anthology to watch. Otherwise, just watch this one and go to the next one. In the future, I might do something similar for other series that have, like, if you don't know, for example, there are a lot of overarching X-Files stories, but there's a lot of, like, flavour of the month, like Monster of the Week ones, etc., where you could definitely do an X-Files best episodes. You could do one from the Twilight Zone. What were the best Twilight Zone episodes? What were the best Seinfeld? Well, these would mainly be, like, a series, and you're picking out the best ones. This is just going to be one from each anthology. So the first thing, I'm going to go in chronological order when it was released, is the original Twilight Zone. So this one, this is 1961's season 3 of the Twilight Zone, episode 8. And that is the one titled, as you can see on the screen, It's a Good Life. Now, this is one of the ones written by Rod Serling, who's like one of the main visionary minds behind the Twilight Zone. And I actually think this might be the best Twilight Zone episode. People often recommend like a lot of the cliched or like the famous ones. Like some of them are good. A lot of them have been parodied and just referenced too many times that a lot of the shock or the twist of some of them just isn't going to hit as hard as it would have done. Or when it came out in the 60s and when it's all black and white, people having their minds blown by the Twilight Zone. But I have to say, this episode holds up like a motherfucker. This is a really good episode still. Because the thing about this episode is, it's just about a boy with magical powers who lives in sort of like a sleepy town. But when you find out the sort of world, because of his magical powers, he's been able to create, and the kind of social dynamic that's been established, and how people have to behave to him, it's an incredible analog or parallel to like totalitarian dictatorship with an evil dictator, where people, like, they have to enable his behavior. You never want to be the person who seems like in any context you're against or disagreeing. It shows how group cowardice works out. Think of that story in Watchmen that Rorschach tells about the idea that like a woman was like being raped and attacked in the street, and people just looked from their windows and nobody went down and helped her. Everyone who reads that goes, nah, that'd never be me. But that happens every day in major cities, things like that. And the point is, it's not that every single person is like, I'm fine with this, or this is acceptable. What they're thinking, though, is, I don't know any of the other people here. If I rush in, maybe it's just me versus a maniac now, and suddenly he's doing it to me, or he's killing me, or I'm next. Like, in that scenario, why would I risk myself? What they don't understand is, yes, collectively, if we had a hive mind intelligence and we all attacked at once, we could instantly shut all of these things down like that, and there would actually be very little potential cost to all of us, because we do it as a mob. But if you don't know that, and this is why dictators get to thrive as long as they do, each person acting individually in this scenario is doing like a fucking cynical prisoner's dilemma, and they're not going to do anything. So I would just say, I won't give any spoilers in any of these episodes. This is terrifying. Even though it's very like mundane, a lot of the things in the episode, it is one of the most terrifying episodes of the Twilight Zone or any horror anthology ever, because of the psychological implications and how almost paralyzing this episode feels to watch. As you watch it, again, no spoilers, you're going to think to yourself, how is this going to revolve? Like, what possible twist are they going to do? What's the way that they're going to like be able to get around this certain thing that's stopping them do something? I won't tell you how they do it, but basically the end is like, holy shit, is that dark. So just wait and see how this one ends. So if you haven't ever watched the Twilight Zone, you can just watch this one on its own. You don't need to know anything else about the Twilight Zone. Then, what's the famous sort of sister series to the Twilight Zone? It was obviously The Outer Limits. Well, what a lot of people might not know is they didn't just keep making later iterations of the Twilight Zone. They made actually a pretty good reboot of The Outer Limits in the 90s, where it was then a colour show, and they brought in a bunch of famous people to work with. So this one here, this is quite a famous one. This is probably the most famous actual episode that I'm going to mention in this series, just because I'm using this to highlight The Outer Limits 1995 series. If you've never heard of that reboot and don't know it's any good, this one is a banger, but it's kind of a classic. This one, Season 1, Episode 1 from 1995 is called Sand Kings, right? First of all, to immediately pique your interest, it was written by George R.R. Martin. But remember, this episode came out in 1995, so George R.R. Martin wasn't this famous cultural figure in the cinema back then. If you don't know, A Song of Ice and Fire was actually sort of niche. It wasn't even as famous as Wheel of Time, if people don't know. It was just Tolkien and Discworld and stuff. And this came like way further down the list and was a little bit more niche. So it's actually quite a well-written episode, I've got to say. The plot is great. It's a really good sci-fi horror plot about a guy where there's these sand kings, these sort of alien intelligences that are sort of like insects with a hive mind, and then he's interacting with them, and obviously you're going to get into philosophical questions, aren't you? Like, how much are they able to communicate or understand what he's doing? What is he understanding compared to them? Is he godlike compared to them? How will they advance as a civilization? It's got a lot of like sort of like potential societal commentary, but it works really just well as a really great horror plot, by the way. You'll actually get a sense of where it's going to go maybe partway through, but I think it's just a well-executed one. And as you can see by the people on the actual graphic there, yeah, these aren't like name actors, but you definitely know the actor in the middle and the actor on the left if you've watched 80s and 90s American movies and TV. So I actually think this is probably the most famous episode of all the ones I'm going to list in this actual TV Gems episode, but I actually think this is one where it's just a great one to watch. Like, you're just going to enjoy it a lot, especially if you like sci-fi and horror. Also just does a really good job addressing that idea that, like, if you're going to have something be alien or other, make it really be like that. Don't make it just like a humanoid type thing that can speak a type of English or with a translator. And it's like, wow, can you believe they also have love and families and honor and respect in their culture too? Like, that's like some Star Trek shit. This is really more the idea of what would like actually contacting or meeting an alien intelligence be like, and how would that intelligence manifest in an alien way, not a human recognizable way. Then we are going to go into the 2000s. We are going to go to 2006. Masters of Horror was the name of the anthology. And if you want to talk about big boys, they got John Carpenter to do an episode of this. So this one is the one. It's season 1, episode 8. It is John Carpenter's Cigarette Burns. Now, John Carpenter, if you don't know, is a horror legend. You think of some of the incredible films he's made over the years. One of the specialties, I would say, of John Carpenter is actually atmosphere. He's a guy who's really good at building up a slow, sort of plodding and eventually suffocating, like intense atmosphere with the music and the image. He's really good at doing that. Now, what's great is this isn't so much like that in this episode, but this is actually a classic trope of like pulp and horror, which is the idea of a forbidden object of desire that everyone's seeking, a kind of MacGuffin. But obviously, when you're in the occult or the horror world, it's going to have some dark aspects to it that are going to tie into psychological things, obsession, like how people will be driven mad. It's almost a Lovecraftian concept built into this. Basically, the premise is someone's searching for an incredibly rare film that was only ever screened once. And then in doing so, it's almost set like a film noir where he's going from person to person and getting a tip from this person and then hearing their story and then seeing this person find out why they had that dynamic with someone before and then how they got to where they are now, and then they recommend someone else and you go there, and as it goes, the sort of tension ratchets up and the story gets more and more extreme and you're seeing where it's going, and as you even find out what is the film about, what was so significant about this film, why is this film so rare, why are people obsessed with it, why do they want it? I think it's just a really well done episode. This is a fucking phenomenal. This is essentially, by the way, this episode is what actually inspired me to make this video. This is the one where I thought people are never going to go and watch Masters of Horror. Some of them were kept more up and down, and some were just really good, some were just alright, some were quite frankly bad. But this one is just a mega standalone. Like, this could just be a John Carpenter film. I mean, I assume the budget's way less. By the way, it's also got some quite famous actors, and like, you are going to immediately recognize some of the actors in this episode. And I think they just do a really good job, like I say, building up like a cast of characters within it, and this set of weird figures from different aspects of industry and media and stuff. And it's just, I'd just say it's a very satisfying like journey and payoff. I think you'll be quite surprised with where it goes at the end. Then I'm going to go into the 2010s. We are going to come to 2016's Sherlock. Is technically season 4, episode 0, because it was the Christmas special. Now, what's funny is I don't particularly like Sherlock, this BBC series. If you don't know, it's almost everything I don't like about Sherlock, because they take the characters of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, they put them in the modern day using, like, by the way, like the most cynically cast people you could ever imagine if you know British television. It's almost like they're actually trying to cast it so your 45-year-old wine aunt will think it's awesome. And they don't make it like genius Sherlock Holmes plots from the books that actually have like great like aspects that fit together. And if you can sort of like logically deduce like Sherlock Holmes with the clues given, you could figure out where it's going. No, it's way more like one of those shows where it's like, Sherlock Holmes just saw that, like, on his collar when he met him initially, there was, like, a fleck of egg, which meant he'd been having egg this morning. But in this country, like, they don't really tend to eat breakfast. They just have a croissant and a cigarette. So does that mean he was somewhere? Like, that sort of shit where you're like, well, could I ever have seen that? Like, this fucking... But you're just supposed to sit back and not attempt to solve the mystery and just go, wow, Sherlock Holmes is amazing. And the problem with this show is, unironically, this is not a joke, they took two people who, in terms of famous actors, I just told you, are like bait for your like aunt to think are harmless or foppish or like sweet men, and then they unironically constantly play with the dynamic of like, they're really good friends, so like, are they gay or something? Are they gay or something? So as a result, I think this show fucking generally sucks and has some of the worst, like, I think I'm smart writing by people who aren't smart enough to A, conceive of a character smart enough to do the things they want, or B, make a satisfying plot. I believe in the Raymond Chandler school of, you never ever cheat with the information you give the person in a detective story. You have to actually genuinely outsmart them and have a better solution than they were able to come up with. If you just do it by camera tricks and lying to them and having, oh, that was just a dream you saw. Well, in that scenario, no one can ever guess. Like, you're just making it like, I have to sit back and I'm just on a ride. I can't even enjoy it at all. There's no component of me being engaged with it. If you watch a Poirot or a real Sherlock Holmes story, they're mega for that. They build up info, and once you get the pattern down and you think like the detective, you can start to make educated guesses that at least get close or are plausible, or sometimes you'll even nail it like 10, 15 minutes in. What they did instead in this was they took the name of a bunch of famous cases, just made their own fucked up modern parallel. And again, it was really just a soap opera about these two guys who may or may not be gay and homoerotic. And then them having like a great personal friendship on some like, oh, that's isn't it wacky? They're like the original odd couple, which isn't at all even how Sherlock Holmes and Watson were. But I say all of that to say the following. I've got a general rule. I like to use the plebs as what I call anti-compasses. So you know how a compass would direct you to north? That's where it would always lead you, right? So you could use it to navigate around the world. Well, similarly, if the compass just always pointed where you don't want to go, then actually by just going the opposite way to where you don't want to go, eventually you'd end up somewhere you do want to go. So if people say, and they do, this series is mega, it's amazing, do you want to know the ultimate irony? They think this is the worst episode. They say this episode sucks and didn't make sense and was just gibberish and nonsense. And it was just all like fucking, it was all just like silly and it didn't quite fit together. And they were trying to do something different because it's a Christmas special. It didn't work. No, it's the other way around. The rest of this show is just slop. It's just mid as fuck. This one episode is the fucking heat rock. This is the KO. This is a banger. And the best part, hence why it's in this video, you don't need to watch any of the other episodes because it's the most unlike all the rest of the series and all the overarching plot. It barely even ties into that. There's a loose connection at the end, but it's not really relevant if you didn't watch before or afterwards. What's great about this one episode is it is a Christmas special and it can stand as a one alone. And what they intentionally do to play with the idea that this is a different one, it's a Christmas special, is the unique aspect is they actually make it a real Sherlock Holmes story. They set it in the time period when Sherlock Holmes was properly set in the stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. They make it like an old school one. Now they've got a clever conceit as to how that comes to be, as opposed to them being in the modern day of like our world of fax machines and fucking mobile phones and the internet and stuff. But that in itself works really well, works way better than normal Sherlock. Then secondly, I won't explain how, but there's a secondary component as well of like other things that are going on that I think is just laid in quite well. It's actually laid funnily of like almost like a Christopher Nolan movie or something, the way they like put that component over the top of it. I think that works really well as well. And then also, as I said, when people tell you, oh no, this is the one that sucks and all the rest were good. No, it's the other way around. The rest suck or are mid. This one's really good and just stands on its own and works phenomenally. Like, this one actually does tie together very well. And I think the ending I find incredibly satisfying. I thought it did a really great job of making everything not just be silly and random. And it might have seemed at times like, how's this going to possibly... It gets drawn together into a really neat bow at the end. This one's a really good one, actually. Just watch this one on its own. The Abominable Bride, it's called. Then we are going to go to a series I always bang on about and no one ever bloody watches. So it's 2017's Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams. Now, as you can imagine, they were cashing in on the name Philip K. Dick because he's done so many different things that were movies and TV, right? Blade Runner being a famous one. So what they did on this series was they took, I believe, a bunch of short stories of his and made, like, again, an anthology of, like, one-off episodes. But first of all, the cast on this is unbelievable. Like, just go and look right now if you want at the cast on some of the different episodes. On almost every episode, you will see famous current modern day TV and movie stars in these films. I mean, this one here has like Anna Paquin and fucking Terrence Howard or whatever in it or whatever. Like, that's unbelievable casting. So one of the things about this is, forget the Philip K. Dick part. That's neither here nor there. This series itself is incredibly underrated and criminally missed or skipped over by other people. If you don't know, I always tell people, Black Mirror is actually a very overrated series. It had the first couple of seasons when it was on UK TV, where it was only like 3 or 4 episodes or something in a season, and those were more like just really out there, like here's like a tech idea, or here's a dystopian future, and they were more trying to make like big societal points with a very British twang to it. Then it became some Americanized Netflix type shit, and it just went completely off the rails, and a lot of them just became bad Twilight Zone episodes. This is exactly what you think you want from Black Mirror. This series has. This series, if it has 10 episodes, then like 6 of them are really good. Like, I could have done 3 or 4 episodes just in this one, but I'm picking this one out as the best one. It is season 1, episode 5. There only is one season, and it's called Real Life. Like, this is way better than any Black Mirror episode ever filmed. It has an amazing cast, as I just said, and it is one of the best TV episodes or films I've seen to try and do a sort of Matrix-esque concept where it's like so real, you're not sure, is that your real life or is the experience the real thing, and your thoughts there are actually your real life, and what you then think you remember as your original life, that's the dream. By the way, that's a fantastic topic if anyone's ever used, for example, psychedelic drugs. That's one of the most actually compelling things about the experience. Sometimes the experience under the drug experience can feel more real than your real life and the memories of that, and sometimes it's not until you come out of it that eventually that becomes more real again, and it takes time for the dream to fade, and it was just a dream. So this is one of the best ones I've ever seen, because the way that the episode is shown, you in theory know the answer. It's not some like Christopher Nolan, like, does it drop at the end, the top? Was it spinning? Was he in the... No, in theory, from the way the episode is told, you do know who is the dreamer and who is the one engaging the dream and going into the Matrix, as it were. But the way they tell the story allows like a sort of suspension of disbelief where it just works. It works either way. And again, I won't give any spoiler on this one, but I think this is actually a really, really well done one. And the way they hop between the two worlds, as it were, it's actually a very clever dynamic. And I find it really interesting how it allows allowed these two different stories to overlap and merge and have parallels between them. And again, it's just really well cast, like high-level actors. Again, this could be a movie in itself. You just extended it 30 minutes and just put some money into the advertising. Then I'm going to take an actual episode of Black Mirror. Now, despite everything I just said, look, I actually stopped watching after, I think, like halfway through the season, after this season 5. I do think they had one episode they did actually hit out the park, and it is this one. It is 2017's season 4, episode 6. It's the one called Black Museum. Now, I will say, I do think generally the US era of Black Mirror fucking sucks. I don't watch it anymore. I just don't find it that interesting. I think it's just gone completely departed. Like I said, it became a poor man's Twilight Zone. But actually, the joke is without a lot of the imagination, because they have just the graphics and the money to spend on graphics and stupid shit like that, and all tech. And too much of it's just tech wankery too. Of like, oh, imagine this with tech. No, you're supposed to do that because it's an amazing sort of conclusion or insight. Not just like, imagine something weird like this, eh? Oh, it's weird. Like, that's not what the Twilight Zone ever was. That's like a caricature of the Twilight Zone. So I will say, there's one aspect I don't like about this, which is if I stop thinking of it as just a piece of art and something fantasy, and I think about the actual real world implications, this episode basically is an insane blood libel against like Americans, essentially, for slavery. But if you take that out for a moment, I don't know who made this episode, who was motivated to make it, as just a horror concept, it is incredibly out there. Like, some of the things that they come up with as like evil machinations within this concept will, 1, blow your mind, 2, are actually terrifying and horrifying and totally inhuman, and 3, will probably blow your mind, bearing in mind it is just about someone going around a museum. But essentially, even though it has a darker implication of what they might be trying to say about like race relations in the modern society, it's a really out there episode. This one actually is a very transgressive, daring episode, or where it actually is willing to even conceptually go. It's really, really out there. And again, you don't have to have ever watched Black Mirror. If you haven't watched this one, go immediately and watch this one. Then the last one is going to be from Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. This is 2022, and this is season 1. There only was one season, I believe, and it is episode 7, The Viewing. Now, this was directed by Panos Cosmatos, who people might know I'm quite a big fan of. I think his film Mandy is a fucking incredible horror, psychedelic film. I'm not the biggest fan of Beyond the Black Rainbow, but it's certainly out there as sort of like an indie film with sci-fi elements. It's really kind of unique. These are just films you have to have seen to even appreciate. Like, they're just so, you can't even describe them. They're so out there as films. But the key thing about Panos Cosmatos is, 1, he hasn't done that. Those are the 2 films he's done, and then he's done this episode of Cabinet of Curiosities. So first of all, he is someone a bit like Robert Eggers. I'm mega hyped. Anything this guy does, I'm pretty much going to give a go. I've bought the ticket. I'm ready for the ride, because he is so good and he has such a strong artistic voice. Like, one of the best things about this guy is he is so effortlessly stylish. Like, he is so fucking good at doing like period, like 70s, 80s style. This is an episode which absolutely, when you watch it, if you didn't know this guy directed it, but I told you like 3/4 of the way through and you knew his past work, you'd go, oh, I see it now. Because it is a really stylish episode. It's all about the atmosphere, the music, the aesthetic, like the slow, creepy build-up of what's going on. I actually think as well, by the way, this also has like Peter Weller in it, if you don't know, the guy from RoboCop. Like, this is one where I won't tell you where it goes or anything about what's going to happen in it, but it's just a really unique episode of an anthology, and just soak in the atmosphere. It is just a pure aesthetic joy to watch this episode. And this one, don't worry, does go absolutely fucking bonkers towards the end, but you're not going to necessarily know where it's going or how it's going to get there. And I actually think the sort of method of how it goes from like conversation to whatever happens is actually quite interestingly set up, because it'll probably make you think other things or make you try and like make guesses about what's going on with the dynamic in the group, and you just won't necessarily see where it's going to go towards the end. But like when I was making this particular video, the 2 episodes that really made me want to do this is, look, I've always thought no one will ever give that black and white Twilight Zone an episode series a go. And the worst thing is there's a million episodes, so people are just going to end up watching the cliched ones, or they're going to watch like the beginning ones, and they're going to miss the real gems. So that I was thinking about the Twilight Zone episode, but the 2 episodes of the anthologies that made me want to make this video was this one, because if you don't know Panos Cosmatos, or rather if you do, but you just haven't seen this episode, you must see it. It's the other 3rd thing he's done that's mega. And then the other one was the John Carpenter's Cigarette Burns. I think also that is just a fucking fucking incredible piece of sort of pulp fiction, as it were, that's just really fun horror and sci-fi plot, which is a classic trope, but the way it's pulled off, I think is executed better than most of the other ones I've ever seen in that particular sense. Put it this way, it has almost a vibe of like a Ninth Gate type vibe, but better. I think it does a better job of that story. So yeah, we go. There are my 7 standalone episodes. You don't need to have watched anything of them in the past. You don't even need to know anything about them. Just download them, get them via whatever service you get them by, watch them, and then let me know. Did you think they are excellent TV gems? I think so. Without the noble families of the Italian city-states, you may never have heard of or been able to appreciate the art of some of the greatest Renaissance artists of all time. And similarly, my content on this channel, which I consider art, is kindly supported by Ibradiation and the rest of my Patreon supporters. Do you want to choose one of the topics that I might focus on next in a video? Maybe you want to ask me a question that I'll answer in a video AMA. Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are for Thor Inquiry. Maybe you want to take part in one of those private, never to be released, recorded for your benefit discussions with me one-on-one, where you can talk about almost any topic, assuming it's appropriate. Well, if any of those perks or others tickle your fancy, heed this call to action and join Thorin's side today at the Patreon link in the description box below.